So I decided to get Jedi Fallen Order recently, seeing as it was a game that I'd had a passing interest in since it came out, and what with the sequel releasing, it seemed the best time to pick it up. For quite a while I'd heard that it was thoroughly entertaining from quite a few people, and thoroughly average from quite a few more, so I was eager to get into it myself to check out what exactly the case was, and how a game studio working with a Star Wars IP, and a high budget with an ex-Jedi as the protagonist set after the prequels, managed to only receive a middling reception amongst many people. I just want to make it clear now, by the way, that I won't be reviewing the entire game from start to finish. Unless something stands out to me as particularly lackluster or lazy, I won't be talking too much about the level design or the music. I'll mostly be focusing on the combat gameplay and some very specific beats in the story that threw me for an insane loop because of how stupid they were. Let's start with some of my biggest gripes with the combat, because I have many, both big and small, but one in particular really stands out even among those. When you begin this game, the combat almost literally couldn't get any simpler. You have a single 3-hit combo with no variation in how it can be applied. You attack, if you wait too long and attack again, it just performs the first attack again. You can slow enemies with the Force, which uses up a portion of your Force power that can be recharged by attacking enemies. You can perform a sidestep that becomes a roll if you dodge twice in quick succession, and you can block and parry. That's it. That is all you start off with for combat options in this game. Surprisingly, this 3-hit combo only experiences very slight changes throughout the game, and it never gets any longer than it currently is. From the very beginning to the very end of this game, you will have only a 3-hit combo on both your single and double-bladed lightsaber. Obviously, I'm not going to draw any conclusions about this yet, but I will say that early on, this combat is the definition of bare bones, and you'll have to get used to seeing the same 3 main attack animations over and over for many hours to come, because if you try to spam your heavy attacks, your force meter will run out in seconds, meaning you're always going to end up defaulting back to that same basic attack combo, which isn't necessarily a criticism. Having a combo that the player can always go back to and rely on is something that many games do to great effect. The problem is that it is literally just a 3-hit combo in this game. A game like Sleeping Dogs, for example, starts the player off with a 5-hit combo that has a different finisher if the player holds attack at different points in the combo, and some of those finishers can be upgraded to allow the player to follow them up with new moves if the attack lands properly. I would absolutely argue that for this game, the lack of basic attacks is overly limiting, and as a result I found myself getting bored of these same attacks very quickly. I'll have plenty more to say about this later, but for now I really want to get onto the kinds of abilities you can unlock in this game. So, as far as abilities go, the one I got the most utility out of in the entire game was easily the slowdown, which you start with. It costs a chunk of your force to use, but it opens any enemy, including bosses, up to at least 2 follow-up strikes, which, once you understand this, creates a very exploitable pattern. Slow the enemy, attack the enemy's guard a few times to build force meter or just wait for it to recharge, slow again, attack again. The reason this is so exploitable is because it allows the player to completely circumvent the stagger mechanic. Why bother working to break a difficult opponent's guard if you can just ignore it and directly attack their health? Like I said before, this strategy really simplifies boss encounters. They have by far the largest stagger bars in the game and more challenging movesets, as you would expect, but this can all just be ignored with the slowdown move. Just avoid their attacks until your slowdown recharges and then go in for some damage. Rinse and repeat until victory or death. It's really just that simple, and that was how I beat basically every boss in the entire game once I understood that. Because they are vulnerable to this strategy, and I have absolutely no idea why the devs didn't try to account for this in at least some of the bosses. Now, moving on, once you get to the first main planet, the skill tree opens up a little and you can buy new attacks. Some of these new attacks cost force to use, and some of them will modify the attacks you already have. Now, the first of these attacks you can buy is an overhead slash, which cannot combo with any other abilities you unlock in the entire game, and the same goes for any other abilities you unlock as well. This is still baffling to me, because it's an opportunity that I never would have expected a game with this budget and backing to pass up on. I would consider this one of the easiest opportunities an action game has to naturally expand a player's moveset. So this overhead slash you unlock is basically a slow heavy attack which does more damage. Very, very simple concept. My first thought upon giving players this would be, well, we could allow them to use it as a finisher in their normal combos to modify what that combo does. One attack followed by a heavy could cause Cal to kick an enemy back and cause a stagger. Two attacks and an overhead could cause it to become a wide sweep targeting enemies' legs that causes knockdown. Now, in an ideal world, an attack like that would cut off all the enemy's legs, but seeing as the lightsabers in this game are basically just baseball bats, I will have to make do with what the game tells me. But instead of any of that, this attack is basically just a normal attack, but it does more damage. It doesn't have any other unique properties attached to it apart from the fact that it also does more stamina damage and it has a significant wind-up, which means it's only really viable to use in combat after a big enemy whiffs an attack. And when I say big enemy, I don't just mean in size. Yes, I mean the big monsters, but I also mean bounty hunters which you can find around the world in the areas you've already beaten. I'm not really talking about bosses here because they have stamina and a good chance to block your attack, meaning that if that happens you've just wasted force power. Basically, when I say big enemies, I'm just talking about enemies that have lots of health. Using it against smaller enemies isn't really worth it because they die too quickly for you to have the time to set up an overhead slash. Unless it's literally the first thing you do, but if you're that close, there's no reason not to just slash them down instead of wasting your force ability. Using it on normal ranged guys would be a complete waste because they have no stamina to defend themselves with anyway, and getting close isn't too much of a risk because they miss half the shots they take even on hard difficulty. It would be viable against ranged purge troopers and ranged bounty hunters, but not too long after you unlock the overhead slash you also unlock a dash attack which is basically the overhead slash, but it also puts you right up to the enemies, making the overhead slash less useful than it already was. So I never really found too much utility for it outside of using it against very specific enemy types such as the giant spiders. I'd like to make it clear that I had a decent amount of fun with this game, but that doesn't change the fact that even on hard difficulty I could get through almost every combat scenario by using the exact same moves, regardless of what the game threw at me. Expanding my moveset shouldn't just be about putting options in front of me and saying, here, if you want them, go for it, but the game won't be too much harder if you don't use them. Extra moves should provide some significant utility to me, some situational or environmental utility that makes certain enemy types easier due to an inbuilt vulnerability they have to certain attacks. Basically, in this game, I never felt as though I needed to use certain moves in my arsenal to come out on top against certain enemy types. I just rolled, mashed attack, and when I got to bosses, I slowed them and attacked again. An example of an attack that I think exemplifies this whole situational use idea is the backhand strike in SIFU. It's a move that initially doesn't seem like a very useful addition to your moveset because you have to prepare it beforehand and time the release, which works opposite to the entire rest of your attacks in that game. It only does fine health and stamina damage on top of being very short range and requiring the enemy to attack you first, meaning if you mess up the release, you're going to get hit. With all that, it seems like a pretty awful move initially and not worth using, until you realise that it can stagger any enemy in the game, including the big guys and bosses, including the final boss out of their attacks, even unblockable ones. But if you don't wait for them to attack you first, there's a high chance it will miss. This attack is usable on any enemy and it's effective against any enemy. It has a very specific use that no other move in the game shares, but it's difficult to use effectively. The move is essentially a risk-reward system in and of itself. And there's no equivalent move in this game that I can say that for, and I don't mean that in terms of mechanics, I mean that in terms of utility. There was no move I started using in combat because I knew that it would make a certain enemy type far easier to deal with. For example, adding enemy types that are immune to your normal lightsaber attacks would force you to rely on your force abilities, or vice versa. Nothing like this exists in the game, and to be clear, these are not requirements. A good game could exist without all these suggestions that I'm making right now. But this game's combat is so easy that adding in systems like this would make it so much more engaging because for once, it would actually require me to tailor the moves I'm using to the specific enemy types I'm coming across, instead of just blasting through everything by mashing attack like I always did. So, I mentioned before that the dash attack is basically just the overhead slash, but it costs slightly more force and launches the player right at the enemy. However, something interesting I noticed about it is that it has a tendency to just miss some of the smaller enemies despite me being locked on. And as far as I can tell, there's no rhyme or reason to it. Sometimes Cal hits the mark, and sometimes he'll simply slide right past them. If it were consistent that the overhead slash misses smaller enemies, I might actually be gently praising this aspect of the game because it would limit my moveset a tiny bit when fighting specific enemies. But, as with many aspects of the combat in this game, another swing, another miss. I'd just like to point out as well that I am more so interested in highlighting ways in which this combat could be made better. There is plenty of valid praise that you could give to this combat system, but I am so baffled by all the opportunities they simply left on the table when it comes to the moves you have in this game. Like, for example, the force, pull, and push abilities. These are the only other combat moves you have to learn throughout the course of the game. Force pull is basically useless in combat until you upgrade it because all it does at base is move your enemy forwards a few feet while doing no stagger or health damage. Force push is more useful to start off with because it allows you to push your targets off ledges to an instant death as well as doing stamina damage. Pushing your targets into walls does a chunk of health damage as well. Unfortunately, and trust me, this is something I tried many times to do, you cannot push enemies into each other to cause a stagger, which is an incredibly unintuitive design choice, because one of the most obvious uses of the Force in a fight with multiple opponents would be to throw them into one another. Even more bafflingly, this game does actually have that ability. You can throw enemies into one another to cause stamina and health damage. But you have to unlock Force Push first, and then upgrade it so you can pick up normal-sized enemies. This is a design decision I still don't fully understand, because it puts you in this weird situation where the developers aren't willing to reward you for skillful play, where you have to position yourself so that you've lined up two enemies mid-fight in order to pull off a Force Push and stagger the both of them, but they are willing to reward you for simply playing long enough and unlocking the ability that allows you to all of a sudden arbitrarily throw enemies into one another using that same ability. Surely the best way to do this would be to force the player to use skillful play in the early game when they only have Force Push. To have to line enemies up in order to knock them down, and then once you've practiced with that, they give you an easier method of pulling it off late game, utilizing both Force Push and Pull that costs more force power to use. This way you can still allow less skilled players to have fun using the move, but they get to use it for less time and have to spend more force power to do it. One requires skill, one requires a time investment to get enough skill points to buy the ability. Finding little ways to reward players for skillful play is something that can push the replayability of a game up significantly, but instead the developers simply overlooked that aspect of combat and chose not to reward me for thinking intuitively. Something else odd about the Force Push and Pull abilities is that for a few seconds they flirt with the idea of giving enemies specific weaknesses to certain abilities. In the tombs you will occasionally, and I mean very occasionally, run across these Tomb Guardian enemies that can be beaten normally by just rolling around and attacking them, but if you use Force Push or Pull on them during the wind-up of one of their attacks, they're exposed to massive damage for a few seconds. Finally, we've got an enemy that has an inbuilt weakness to specific attacks that the player can exploit to be more effective in combat. It does take a few hours into the game before you actually meet this enemy, but at least it's here now. On the downside, as far as I remember, I only encountered this enemy type about 4 to 6 times throughout the whole game. And these guys go down quick once you learn to exploit that weakness, so they've never really made for a challenging encounter, which is a shame, because this right here is the beginning of an interesting enemy type. They just need a more challenging moveset and to be put with other enemies to make them a threat. And as far as I know from my experimentation, there is no other enemy type in the entire game that has a weakness like this, so enjoy it while it lasts, I guess. So the other main aspect of Force Pull and Push I need to talk about, and this is possibly the most baffling aspect of the game's design, because it was such an obvious opportunity that they could have taken to spice up the combat. There is not a single environmental object in this game that you can pick up and throw at enemies with the Force. Nothing in the environment is grabbable, despite there being explosive canisters and metal barrels and tables and giant storage crates and gonk droids hanging around the place. None of it is grabbable or movable in any way, it's all just set dressing. To add to this, there are no interactable environmental objects that can get you instant kills, like using the Force to burst steam pipes or cause rock slides, or maybe even crack icy floors to drop enemies into the freezing waters below. That last one could even be a double-edged sword. Use the Force to drop an enemy through the ice, but now it's an instant kill pit if you fall in it because the current will carry you away. Throughout the entire game you have BD, but you can't use him to detonate control panels on the walls and shock enemies, despite the fact that the overcharge function you unlock for BD literally allows him to turn machinery on and off. It's never used once in the game to create an interesting combat arena. Maybe if you're in a shipyard, BD could turn the ship's engines on and off to incinerate enemies, but watch out, it's on a cooldown and if you get caught up in it, there's no way to turn them off again. Stuff like this is the first place my mind goes to when you tell me that these are abilities I have as a player, but nothing like this was implemented anywhere. And it would give you so many more options to interact with the environment and the world and the enemies that you're fighting. In fact, the only factor about your environment that actually matters is the arena you're in. Does it have walls or does it drop off into a bottomless pit? That is the only environmental factor that can have an effect on your combat. Now, I know I mentioned BD earlier, and I would argue that he is also a missed opportunity on the same level as the set-dressing environments. He's mostly used as a traversal tool, and in combat he's a portable droid that can provide you with health stims and override droids once you get pretty far into the game. That is the entire list of his uses in combat for the whole game, when I can think of at least a half dozen more that aren't really all that complex mechanically. Giving him the ability to jam enemy guns or turn off stun batons on a cooldown is the first thing that comes to mind, because it would actually give him an offensive use. Maybe once you upgrade him, he can overload enemy weapons to actually deal damage to the enemy as well. Doing this could prevent him from being able to heal you in combat for a short time. That way it's a trade-off and the player will have to make that call mid-combat. Do you want BD available to heal you at all times, but then he never helps you in combat, or do you want him out there dealing damage, but he won't always be able to heal you immediately? Perhaps make it so that you can choose between an aggressive or a support BD that have different combat roles. Let him emit a signal to draw the aggro of certain enemies, but maybe only animals and droids fall for it. You could give him consumable weapons like smoke bombs or flashbang grenades, but then again, maybe only certain enemies are vulnerable to them. Just giving him any kind of varied stims would make things more complex as well. By the end of this game, you can have a huge amount of very effective healing stims that will also fully restore your force power. Once you get even moderately competent at the combat, you'll never need more than that. The game becomes incredibly easy once your healing really starts to stack up. So, how about less healing stims, but instead you can get ones that provide short-term buffs? One of them gives you slightly more attack damage, one of them makes it so that you can't be staggered, one of them gives you a slightly faster dodge. It should be clear at this point that there is a whole host of systems that this game was perfectly positioned to implement and didn't. Instead, the most complex mechanic we get for BD is the droid can heal you, be careful when it runs out of healing, which is enough complexity to keep me invested for the first hour or so, but after that my interest really started to wane once I realised that BD wasn't getting any more moves. The only extra attack he does get, as I mentioned earlier, is the override, which allows you to take over enemy droids. But the game doesn't do too much to play with this either. There's only a handful of encounters throughout the game where this is actually useful. So most of the time I just wound up forgetting that I even had an override ability, because the small droids are easy to kill anyway, and the big ones show up so infrequently that you almost never get to use it on them. Oh, and speaking of combat oversights, ranged encounters. Cal doesn't really have many ranged abilities, him being a Jedi and all. The most you get is a lightsaber throw later in the game, which doesn't have all that impressive a range even once you upgrade it. Which means that when dealing with blaster enemies, you'll mostly be relying on parrying incoming bolts, which, isn't exactly challenging. Even the commanders don't put up much of a fight. As soon as you get the double-bladed lightsaber, which is available as soon as you complete the first planet in the game and isn't even hidden, ranged combat becomes something of a joke. All it takes to kill a normal ranged enemy is for you to reflect a single attack and they're dead, meaning I often found myself killing them accidentally in combat because they barely do any damage to you when they hit you. The biggest threat they pose is that their attacks can open you up for other enemies to chain damage onto you. In a similar vein, the minigun enemies become a non-threat as soon as you get the double-ended lightsaber. All you have to do is parry that first bolt, and then every single consecutive one will automatically be parried too. And I think it would be so much easier to make parrying ranged attacks more mechanically interesting than just timing a button press. Surely it would greatly add to the fantasy of playing a Jedi character if, by using the movement controls, you could aim the shots you're parrying at any enemies you want. For example, if you parry a shot from the left but move to the right, then Cal would deflect it into the enemy on your right. Simply standing still would still parry the shot back at the attacker. Just with this simple change, ranged combat already has more depth to its mechanics because now there is an incentive for players who are confident in their parrying abilities and their ability to manage multiple threats at the same time to keep ranged enemies alive so that they can use their attacks to harm others. It's a simple risk-reward system that rewards players for skilled play. That isn't in the game, because of course it isn't. This is Jedi Fallen Order. What the fuck did you expect? This is less of an objective criticism, but this game is incredibly inconsistent on how Cal's lightsaber works. To start with, it is impossible to cut any body parts off of human enemies in the main game. Cal will slash right through their torsos, he will slice right through their heads and cut diagonal lines right through them, but not a single limb shall you ever bisect. This is something that really adds to your weapon feeling like a stun baton rather than an actual lightsaber. According to Screen Rant, this was a Lucasfilm and Brand thing, which seems to imply Disney involvement to avoid the game appearing too gory. But the thing is, they aren't even consistent in this either, because you can cut limbs off in the game, but only off certain non-human enemies, and in the exact same way every single time. I'm not asking for Metal Gear Rising levels of dissection, but making it impossible to dice up any human enemies when your character supposedly has a lightsaber makes it feel as though you're just hitting them with a baseball bat. And you may be thinking that this is because Disney and Lucasfilm doesn't want humanoid enemies being dismembered. But that's not even the case either, because as part of the main story, Cal slices off the ninth sister's hand and you get to see the cauterized stump full on. Now, I will grant that the stump really doesn't look gory at all. It's just black like it's made of tar and there's no bone or anything to speak of. It's just a black surface with an orange heat outline, but it's there. And if they're willing to show this as part of the main story, then why aren't they willing to just use this effect in gameplay? Because it would make your weapons feel more powerful using animation, even if they function the exact same way as before. This is what gets me. They say they don't want dismemberment, but then they implement it in such a way that you can't miss it, and they show you a close-up of it. Now, it should be noted that in a different article they claim that Disney and Lucasfilm wants to save dismemberment for the big moments of the movies and games. But that isn't even true anyway, because as I've already shown, you can dismember monsters and animals in this game, even going so far as to slice the little rat creatures in half. They let you pull off some brutal executions on the little rat guys, and I'm pretty certain a rat guy doesn't count as a big moment. So all they've done is choose to make my weapon feel as though it's a glorified stun baton every time I face off against one of the most common enemy factions in the whole game. So, thanks, I guess. I'm not really planning to talk about the enemies as a whole, but there is one exploit I really just want to mention, because I do not know how this got into the game. It's so easy to do. The shock troopers are some of the higher tier enemies in the game. They have higher health and larger stamina bars, as well as actually having attacks that can ignore your guard. My problem is that some of them have really simple exploits that make fighting them easy. These dual wielders are by far the worst offenders. All you have to do to kill them is attack until they parry you, at which point they will always attack, you hold block, and Cal will parry them automatically. Because by the time he recovers from being parried, he'll get his block up at the perfect time to parry them right back. You just rinse and repeat this until their block is broken and then attack. And bear in mind that this exploit is only necessary if you don't want to use any force power on them. Just slowing and attacking them works fine, just like it does with every other enemy type in the game. There is absolutely one boss in the game that deserves a special mention, because of how absolutely embarrassing it was as an encounter. The AT-ST. This thing is supposed to be a powerful walking tank that can obliterate you with grenades and blaster bolts. However, in reality, it's not particularly mobile and can only lumber away from you for short periods before just standing completely still and allowing you to just take away massive chunks of its health. Sure, it'll drop a grenade, which you'll only ever get hit by if you can't be bothered to dodge. It drops a carpet of stun grenades that can open you up to blazer blasts, but again, all you have to do is roll away and you get plenty of time. Just look at this footage. This is on normal difficulty, I believe. Even with these grenade abilities, sometimes it takes so long to drop them that it literally can't deal with you if you just run up to it and start hacking away. If you're feeling like it, you can even tank the damage from the grenades and just keep attacking. It'll only take one heal to get that health back anyway. The combat in this game is very lackluster in terms of the variety of attacks and encounters for the length of the game. There are over 30 upgrades you can get for Cal in this game, but around 2/3 of them are simple damage or effectiveness increases for your other attacks. Basically just bigger numbers, like giving you a stronger force push or a longer slowdown. Only about 10 or 11 of these upgrades actually provide you with new moves, and some of them are very minor in the utility that they provide. One of these lets you delay and then attack to perform a thrust with slightly longer range than your normal attacks, but it doesn't have a stun attached to it or any significant damage change. The most effective attack you have, which allows you to just completely ignore the guard of any enemy, is unlocked from the very beginning and is just as effective against the final boss as it is against the first throwaway enemies. Similarly, other attacks you unlock in the game could combo into each other to create unique attacks with situational uses, but instead, the game is oddly content to keep almost all of its abilities completely separate from one another. In fact, I think the only ability combo in the entire game is when it lets you use force pull to pick someone up and then force push to throw them. Which is a very strange choice for a game in which a large part of the story is centered around the protagonist regaining proficiency in abilities and powers they'd let atrophy over the course of years. It would serve both the story and the gameplay for there to be more of an evolution and intermingling of Cal's abilities instead of him simply relearning some basic force abilities that have little to no crossover. In terms of difficulty, I would argue the game is altogether too easy on both the normal and hard difficulty, with enemies doing pitiful amounts of damage that can be easily recovered from once the player's found a few extra health stims. However, it is also worth mentioning that I appreciate that this game doesn't do what most games do with its difficulty and simply increase the amount of health enemies have while decreasing the damage you do to make it harder. This game doesn't do anything too interesting if you change the difficulty up, but I appreciated that it simply made the enemies more aggressive and lowered the parry window instead of making everyone bullet sponges. Because many games do that, and all it usually does is increase the frustration and the time I have to spend in combat rather than actually making anything more difficult. Now, before I start talking about the story of this game in general, that was apparently written by real actual humans with actual functioning brains, I just want to mention, Jedi Fallen Order, a game that was released in 2019, has unskippable story cutscenes even on New Game Plus. So, if you want to replay this game, get ready to sit through the exact same riveting story all over again. This is something I really just can't believe. They haven't added a skip function to this game even after all this time. Did they really think their story was just so amazing that no one should ever be able to deprive themselves of it, even on a second playthrough? Because that's kind of funny. Oh, also, just like in the gameplay section, I am not covering the entire story comprehensively because I'm really not that invested in this story. But I will be talking about some of the major beats a lot because some of this stuff is cataclysmically awful, especially towards the end. Now, the first few minutes of this game aren't really that relevant story-wise. They only really serve to introduce the platforming mechanics, and the only story-relevant part is that Cal reveals to his friend that he has the Force, but he dies very quickly, and you only get about 25 minutes total with him. I mean, I will admit, I felt a little bad when he died, because the Inquisitors basically just killed him for saying something they agreed with, Hassan style.
Very nice work.
But it does at least draw Cal out, which I am assuming is what they were counting on. So far the villains are at least looking somewhat competent. They've tracked down Cal, and now they've drawn him out. Then, our plucky hero, who just stood there and did nothing while his friend got killed, gets dropped about 10 or 15 stories onto a moving train and smashes through the glass roof. He survives this, and we're supposed to also believe that he is a normal human. Yeah, I know he has the Force, but that really doesn't negate impact damage, or at least it shouldn't. If we're to believe he's a normal human, his bones are just powder floating around in his bloodstream right now. And you know what would lessen this plot armor? Cal landing on something soft, or at least not metal that was packed in the train car. And yes, that would be a massive contrivance, but it would be a tiny little bit better than this. Oh, and this is something else, but the obvious solution here would just be lessen the fall distance. Having your character fall a distance like this actually has the opposite effect the devs probably wanted it to have. They probably thought, well, this will ratchet the tension up, as Cal falls to his demise only to be saved by hitting the ground at full speed? Yeah, I don't really even get that, but I can see their intention here. The problem is that having your characters survive stuff like this and be just fine tells the audience that they are invulnerable to all threats, because they are the protagonist. For people paying attention, trying to get invested, it's actually a lowering of the tension, because as Cal performs death-defying stunts throughout the rest of this level, you won't really care as much, because you know that a fall from this distance doesn't mean death. He'll be fine, he's already done it once. And even in cutscenes, you'll be thinking, well, it'll be fine. The plot will bail Cal out if he gets in trouble. Instead, lessening the fall distance, having him land on something soft and showing that he needs a long recovery time before he can fight again, making him seem like a human who has human vulnerabilities, would go a long way to making me feel as though he was in serious danger. Hypothetically, if you were really invested in Cal as a character up to this point, it would be hard to justify thinking he's ever in mortal danger again after this, if he can just shrug it off in seconds. It's very odd as a design choice, and it's only going to get odder from here on out. So, Cal fights off some stormtroopers until the train starts collapsing, and there are some insane Uncharted-style hijinks, and then the whole thing goes and Cal starts sliding, not bothering to hold onto the sides at all until he falls right off the edge and breaks his back on this solid metal frame. So we're about, 20-25 minutes into this game, and he's dead twice over? Good. You see what I mean about how this guy is indestructible? How can I fear for the life of a character who seemingly can't be hurt at all in cutscenes? Then, somehow not winded to all fuck, he grabs onto this drone thing which just so happened to be flying by at this exact moment and glides down just in time for the Inquisitor to land. But I don't want to gloss over that. Make no mistake, if that drone had been 1 second ahead or behind, Cal wouldn't have been able to reach it, because he doesn't have force pull or push yet. And he would have, well, I was about to say he would have died. He would have been more mildly inconvenienced by slamming into the ground at terminal velocity. And here we go. The Inquisitor fight. Now, why the Inquisitor chooses to face him one-on-one when she could just blow him away in her fighter, I do not know. Throughout this game, I never really get the impression that she's an honourable combatant. Surely she'd just take the path of least resistance. And strangely, they had an opportunity to explain this with no time added to the scene whatsoever. Just show some damage on her fighter, have it wobble as it lands, and slam down instead of landing gently. That would clearly show players it's no longer capable of safe or stable flight. We don't even need to see how it gets damaged. We can infer that, well, Grease must have gotten her. Oh, and for those who disagree that she isn't an honourable character, her decision to do this is what allows Cal to get away, and it nearly gets her killed. Regardless of her honour, her choice to do this makes her look like an idiot. So even if you can make a compelling argument that she is honourable, you still have to accept that she's a complete moron here. And let's be fair, an honourable Sith would be an exception to the rule. If you're going to have one, they need to be clearly characterised that way, but she isn't at any point in this game. Anyway, they talk, they duel, and then as they stand there with their weapons just held together, not moving at all, Sayre's ship flies up and tries to kill both of them. Only, on this occasion, the blast from the ship-mounted cannon that just detonated this other ship earlier doesn't kill either of you or even hurt either of you. I guess they were using the not stun rounds because you're not even stunned either. Instead, it just perfectly separates you with no damage done to either side, because these are our main characters and we just really needed to throw our hero and villain together in a dramatic opening confrontation. But we also want them both to escape with no real damage to either side, because Trilla can't die yet, sadly, and Cal can't die at all. If you don't have an intelligent way to separate your characters after having them get involved in a fight, then maybe it would have been better to just show a little bit more restraint and have them not fight until later in the game. Because as it stands, if you weren't already completely pulled out of this game, I do not see how anyone can remain invested in this after watching what just happened. Then, as if it couldn't get any fucking dumber, the ship that just tried to kill you pulls up alongside and tells you to get on, and Cal does. He isn't even wary of the ship or the people on it that just tried to kill him, because we can't let logic interrupt our action sequences. Then it gets even dumber. Cal gets on and the ship just sits there. Sarah doesn't tell them to take off, she doesn't even close the door. She just stands there, watching as the Inquisitor gets closer. And I know, yes, this is her former apprentice. But being shocked and retaining brain function are not mutually exclusive things. Instead, Sarah, the absolute genius, decides it's a good idea to shoot at a Force user with a lightsaber. Someone who is a former Jedi decides that is her best plan of action, and it's only when the Inquisitor gets dangerously close that she tells Grease to take off, as if leaving was the backup plan, and not the only plan, in case her genius plan of just shooting at a Sith with a single semi-auto gun failed. Believe it or not, it fails. The Inquisitor tries to jump in, but as the camera angle changes, so too does her momentum, and so she doesn't quite make it. Instead, she crawls onto the top of a moving starship, somehow, in the middle of a storm and hangs from the front window. Right, okay. Apparently this ship comes with handholds installed on the front window for, reasons. Cal doesn't use the Force to counter her. Instead, Sarah just yanks the controls. This woman's Force abilities are apparently so weak that the average person can just use a single arm to overpower her with no trouble. She survives this, by the way. I don't know why I even had to say that at this point. Of course she does. It's Jedi Fallen Order. People can't be killed by falls. Why should we expect any different? And in case I didn't make it quite clear, all those issues I just highlighted at the end there are all terrible issues to have, all of which make this scene entirely unbelievable. Characters acting idiotically, a specific character forgetting who she's fighting for no reason, the Inquisitor not making it onto the ship because the game cheated and changed her momentum mid-air, her somehow climbing around a moving starship like it's nothing, and then getting flung off, and surviving. All this plot armor for characters makes it feel as though the writers have already given up, and they aren't concerned with how this scene should run based on the abilities their characters have. Instead, they will just simply force characters to act how they want them to, because they think it'll look cooler, I guess, even if it makes those characters appear dumber. Whew, thank God that scene's over. Now, there is plenty of context in between here and the moment that I'm about to skip to in this game, but as I said before, I'm really not too interested in nitpicking dialogue. I want to focus on the most significantly awful moments of this story, so I'm just gonna ignore a lot of the connective pieces that make it up and focus on the big contradictions instead. So here we go, the second duel. There really isn't too much to say about the dialogue at the beginning. Basically, the context is that she wants info from Cal, and he isn't giving it. But my god, the choreography, once again. Look at that! He telegraphs the widest, slowest swing ever made, so she can push him back, and then he just turns his weapon off for no reason, opening himself up to a killing blow. The only reason he survives here is because he gets lucky, once again, and she just so happened to throw him behind a force field. And for those of you saying, well, the lightsaber fell out of his hand. He had to scramble for it, see? He's still holding it well after he gets thrown through that gate. The only way it could have gotten out of his hand is if he threw it away. And once again, they cannot resist making the villain stupid as well. She wants information from him, but she goes for a killing blow. It's like nobody writing this was communicating with the people making these fights. So, this is possibly the most embarrassing encounter in the game. It's worse than the first one where they throw you off a cliff to start with. Here, Trilla is actively dueling you, and this time there's no Sair flying around to bail you out. So you fight, and in typical Fallen Order fashion, it ends with you just clashing sabers and holding them together, as if you aren't a single quick movement away from being able to kill Trilla. But then it gets worse. Somehow it gets worse once again. Like an absolute beginner, Trilla pulls back to swing at Cal. Fortunately for her, Cal also doesn't know how to sword fight, so he doesn't just move his blade forwards to slice her apart. Instead, he just turns it off, because, get this, Trilla, the supposed trained Sith Inquisitor, swung for his blade rather than him, so he just knocks her down with the Force. And I want to make this very clear, this is one of the biggest beginner mistakes when somebody who is completely new first picks up sword fighting. They will swing for their opponent's weapon rather than their opponent because they feel threatened by the weapon itself and are more concerned with keeping it at bay rather than keeping at bay the person wielding it. This makes them extremely vulnerable to all sorts of simple attacks and counters. I mean, look at this one. Cal doesn't even move until her strike is upon him. He doesn't dodge it, she just misses because she doesn't even know the bare bones basics of sword fighting. And I will freely admit, by the way, that I am not someone who knows anything about sword fighting. But I know enough to know that attacking your opponent's weapon is not what ends a fight. And this is supposed to be the main villain of the game. And look at that as well, such a massive overcommittance to her attack. Talk about leaving yourself open, her back is practically to him. Even batters in baseball don't overswing that much. And she just stands there for a second, staring at the floor, like her brain is resetting. She even looks at Cal for a second and does nothing so he can knock her over with the Force. Look where the second blade of her lightsaber is. All she has to do is move it up and Cal is dead. This entire fight is so strange. It's like watching two people trying to offer their heads to each other with every movement and nothing ever comes of it. And I hate to criticize, that's a lie. Why does Cal just push her here? He could kill her easily and we know he is okay with killing Inquisitors. There's no excuse for it, so all you can really say is, well, he had a momentary lapse in judgment, which is possibly the most unsatisfying excuse to keep a villain alive. Anyway, he picks up her lightsaber, and so you'd think the duel is over. However, as I was playing through this for the first time, little did I know that one of the most confusing parts of the game was about to begin. As soon as he grabs it, he starts tripping out, and he is just out of the fight immediately. He is literally made helpless by touching her lightsaber, and the only way that she takes advantage of that is by taking the holocron. Cal is defenseless right now. She could kill him easily and she doesn't. She even leaves her lightsaber with him. Before we move on to all the massive ways this doesn't make any sense whatsoever, I just want to point out that this was a prime opportunity to give Trilla some much needed characterization. We really don't know too much about the person she has become / is becoming. And it would humanize her so much more to give her a moment of hesitation here, where she considers killing Cal and then decides she can't go through with it because he's unarmed. That would make it clear just how much she's still struggling with becoming a Sith Inquisitor. And it would go a long way to humanizing her, because right now I see her as little more than a murderer. What makes this scene even weirder is that Cal just went through a short arc where he learned to stop running from the events of his past and not be ruled or weakened by the guilt that he felt for not being able to step up when his master needed help. Instead, he accepts it and masters whatever weird-ass visions Dathomir was showing him. But now, the memories and feelings of someone else's traumatic past can completely disable him? When he was dealing with his own trauma, he could still fight and had agency in his hallucinations to the point that he could master them, but now it's just arbitrarily too much? Are we just supposed to believe that Trilla just went through even more trauma and that's why he can't hold up here? Because that really needs more explanation if that's what they want us to believe, because you can experience some pretty harrowing ends to people's lives throughout the Force sense objects throughout this game, and Cal never reacts to any of those in this way. And with some of those objects, he was experiencing people's last moments. I don't think you could ask for a stronger surge of emotions than experiencing someone's last seconds alive. But nah, Trill has just been through so much that he can't deal with it. Oh, and I know that Cal has these super force powers, and that's how he's able to experience these memories, but he's experiencing memories that this lightsaber wasn't present for. Is it just someone touches an object enough and then their memories get transferred into it? That can't be how it works, because if it was, everything Cal is touching would have some residual memories attached to it. That constant flood of memories that aren't your own would have driven him mad long ago if certain memories can have this kind of effect on him. If this is a force power that Cal knows he has, then he would have trained it extensively with his master or someone else who had the same ability, and he would have obviously learned how not to be affected by memories like this, because if he didn't, he wouldn't be able to function as a person. And finally, not to harp on about this any longer, but I do not think this reaction is even related to his force sensibility. I mean, it would make sense, but Trilla doesn't know that Cal has this ability, and she reacts with, careful with that thing, it's been through hell. She's not confused or alarmed by his reaction at all. It's like she was expecting exactly this to happen, and because she doesn't know about his ability, I'm forced to conclude that this is just what happens to any force-sensitive person who picks up her lightsaber. Meaning she could have just killed him instantly from the first time they met by just giving him her lightsaber and then taking his and slicing his head off. And she didn't. Because she's, I don't know, stupid I guess? Anyway, because of this massive multitude of contrivances, she gets away with the holocron. She also doesn't send in the troopers outside to execute you while you're defenseless, she just leaves. And I guess expects you won't retaliate, because we needed to make her just a tad dumber before the final level. Just a little bit. I'm sorry? Excuse me? Do you want to fucking run that one by me again? She can just pick it up, with no mandatory NAM flashback. Okay, so the preceding scene just got a few orders of magnitude dumber. Because if the memories that have somehow transferred into Trilla's lightsaber aren't always debilitating, then that means one of two things. Either Cal's force sensibility is what triggered it, and Trilla just got astronomically lucky that he happened to have it, or it only affects some people when they pick it up, and Trilla just got astronomically lucky. The writers are welcome to choose. Either way, Trilla's life just got saved by luck here, which means her taking the holocron was luck as well, so, you know, the plot's only somewhat in shambles at this point. And this is more of a question than a criticism, because Disney has not answered this satisfactorily in any of its mainline content. What is the point of cutting yourself off from the Force if you can just reconnect with no effort? Sarah says she cut herself off like it's a big deal, you know, maybe she'll be as weak as Cal was at the beginning of the game, because her abilities have atrophied. You know, maybe there could be a discussion on how that might make her more likely to tap into the dark side to make up for her lost power. Instead, she just stands up and adeptly pulls the saber to her like it's second nature. If this is possible, then why are her abilities intact while Cal has lost everything and had to build it back up? Ignoring for a second that this is a game and they obviously just did that for progression reasons, what sense does this make in the context of the story? Did Sarah just put the Force on hold until she was ready? If that's something you can do, why does anyone cut themselves off from the Force in the first place? If you're not going to stick to how the Force used to work, then can you please at least just be consistent with how it works now instead of confusing me all the time? So here we go, it's time for the final level. The plan, sneak in, bust up the base, kill everyone on the way, steal the holocron back, and leave. So, we drop in, fight our way through the station like planned, and ignoring the water pressure that would have just crushed Cal to death in a split second down here, we keep going until we get to just another incredibly choreographed fight scene. And I know, this does not have hardly anything to do with the story being told, but I have a fascination with cringe choreography, and there really is no excuse when it's being animated. Everything goes exactly as you want it. You don't have to rely on your actors pulling everything off perfectly. so it really confuses me when mistakes this big are made. Now, in the intro of this game, Sarah was shown to be a pretty good shot. She pulls off 8 would-be kill shots in a row back during that first encounter with Trilla, if she hadn't dodged them, meaning she's a pretty good shot at this kind of range, so let's see how she does now. Oh, she misses 4 times and manages to shoot the roof. Okay, maybe she's having a stroke or something. Let's carry on. Oh, so she is accurate then. Oh, alright. Also, this guy on the right here is just standing around, waiting to be shot. Her head was exposed there, her everything was exposed. She just threw away her weapon and this guy stands there so that she can kill him. And this guy in the background, what the hell is happening with him? He's got his gun, the lightsaber goes by him, he then falls over for some reason and his gun is just gone. It's not in his hands anymore, I guess. The TLJ disappearing weapon is making a return here. Then he scrambles for the other guy's gun, which, I mean, fair play, that's not a bad move. He actually gets it and has a shot on her, but she kills him just in time, which would be tense. But just after he grabs the gun, he moves towards her for no reason. He has a rifle, a ranged weapon, and he chooses to get just a few meters closer so she can kill him. And if he hadn't, she would have been dead. Then it gets worse, because she turns and has a kill shot. But instead she chooses to just spin her weapon because flourishing mid-combat gives you extra cool points for that SSS rating, I guess. Then this guy also decides to just spin his weapon despite having a kill shot as well so that she can kill him once she's done with her fancy little flourish. And then this guy just gets shot, which is fine. It's the best done kill in this scene, which really isn't saying much, unfortunately. Making the enemy faction this incompetent really hampers their ability to come across as threatening at all. Not only are they easy in gameplay, but they also display idiocy in combat on the same level as Trilla. The worst part is that the fix for this is easy, and you don't even have to increase the length of the fight. Just hire somebody for a day who knows anything about swordsmanship. They would improve the choreography immeasurably. Instead of spinning their weapons like morons, maybe Ser turns and immediately goes for the kill, but he pushes her blade away. So she gives a little ground, lets him think he's got her, he overcommits, she takes advantage of it and kills him. That would also give the other guy plenty of time to get back up off the ground, and all it requires is changing the animation instead of extending the fight. And it wouldn't make me cringe my eyeballs out on a second watch. Just one game, just give me one good fight scene, please. So Cal reaches the holocron finally, only Trilla is waiting to ambush him. I guess she got a new lightsaber? I guess they just have those on backup. Anyway, Cal decides to kill her so he can stop another innocent lightsaber being traumatized with her fucking memories. Oh god, more of this, just standing face to face having a conversation while their blades are locked. Just tilt your blade forwards and you can slice her face in half. Instead, they always just stand here and jump away from each other at the same time like a choreographed dance instead of a real fight. Anyway, Cal gets a kill shot and instead of taking it, he goes for the shoulder. Now, thankfully, I can at least buy that he wouldn't want to kill her unless it was absolutely unavoidable at this point in the story, because he knows that Trilla is Ser's apprentice. So that's not really too much of a problem. Thankfully. Unfortunately, then Vader shows up, and trust me, it's not long before they make him look like a moron as well. Now, I've got no idea where he came from. Apparently he was just chilling in the rafters, waiting for Trilla to lose. My guess is that she would have informed him once she found the holocron, meaning either he got here just in time to intercept after she lost, or he got here in advance and just chose not to help her for no reason. So either he was lucky to get here in time, or he just let her die for no reason. And if that second reason is canon, if he got here in time to watch her fight, then that means he let Cal pick the holocron up. Which is the only reason Cal is able to escape with it. So he kills her, and neither Ser nor Cal does anything to stop this. Now obviously, if either of them had gotten into a force battle with Vader, they would have lost. But they have to at least try. At the very least, Ser has to try. Otherwise it just comes across as though she doesn't care that Trilla, who she's been haunted by her failure of, is about to die. So then Sarah somehow, miraculously, drops another few IQ points. She tells Cal to run, and then she does what is quite possibly the most telegraphed attack I've seen in anything. The best part of this is that he doesn't even block it, because why would he? She launched herself into the air for him already. He just changes her momentum slightly and she goes flying off the edge of the platform into, I guess, lava? I don't really know of anything else that gives off that kind of light and heat. She just fed herself to him in the most embarrassing fashion she could have. At least if she was screaming bloody murder over the death of Trilla, I could partly justify it as her not thinking straight, but all things considered, she seems calm right before she jumps. Now, on the way back, we get more of the typical shit this game does, where everything just falls perfectly in your path to create wall running segments, even though Vader is literally ripping it apart. For some reason, he lets you wall run on them. I do not know why. So Cal gets to the elevator, and Vader is just standing there like a robot. He only starts walking when the door is closing. Oh, I see. He's gonna force the doors open anyway, and he's gone. You know, I'm really not sure why I expected Vader would escape the terrible fight choreography, but couldn't they just have made it so that Cal gets to the elevator and Vader just isn't there yet? Maybe he's taken a secret route instead of just standing there like a moron. And let's be clear, Sarah can't save Cal here. Yes, she is still alive, don't ask how, I don't have an answer and neither does the game. If he'd attacked Cal here, he would have been killed or captured. But instead, Vader just stood there, not doing anything, and Cal got away because Vader is an idiot, apparently. Great, I hate it. So Vader shows back up and nearly kills Cal until Sarah shows up again, somehow still alive after falling into lava, don't question it, and starts to have a force-off with Vader. Then she creates this, shield thing out of... Just show her using the Force normally, you don't have to make up new rules on the spot. I would have understood if she just held her hand up and he couldn't move forwards. This goes on for a few seconds before Cal blows the window out, killing everyone immediately. Oh, sorry, this is Clown World, so yes, of course, now Sarah and Cal can just swim out of the window, with water thundering through it with God knows how many pounds of pressure while Vader does a Kenobi, which... Holy shit, I just realised. Is this where they got the idea for that stupid shit in the Kenobi series? Oh god, if you're gonna copy something, guys, at least copy something good. Or, you know, half decent. Anyway, even if we accept that Cal is just magically outside now, it doesn't get any better. Sarah's unconscious now because she decided she wanted to be. There's no reason for this. Vader didn't stab her, she didn't get hit on the head, she's just out cold because that's what the plot demands. So Cal gives her his breather and starts swimming up without one. I thought we had peaks in terms of stupidity, I'm gonna be honest, but this is it. This is the peak of the mountain. We found it, lads. Cal thinks he, a supposedly normal human, can swim while dragging an unconscious body with him this entire distance without taking a single breath. Oh, what a surprise. Now you're both dead. He could have just taken her breather. She obviously has one. She infiltrated this place the same way as he did. She didn't swim to this base holding her breath, and even if she didn't have to swim through the ocean to get here, if you're going on a mission into a base in the deep ocean, you would take a breather with you whether or not you needed one to get there. Of course you would. They take up almost no space and provide seemingly infinite oxygen. Oh my god, they didn't just do that, did they? I knew this woman could teleport, that's an incredibly useful ability, but I was giving the game the benefit of the doubt and was assuming that maybe it had a limited range. She just teleported from wherever Grease's ship is, hundreds of meters down into the ocean, and then teleported Cal and Sarah out of there in seconds. I don't think the writers quite realised they just fucked their entire finale in one move. You see, other better writers realise the problems that teleportation presents and write ways to deal with it. Nightcrawler from X-Men can teleport, very powerful stuff, but if he isn't visualising where he wants to end up, then he could literally end up in a wall and die instantly. He needs to know where he's going, otherwise it's an incredibly dangerous thing to even attempt. The Night Sisters, however, can teleport not just themselves, but at least 2 other people hundreds of meters simultaneously wherever they want, even to places they've never been before. And if that's the case, why did we sneak down here in the first place? Just get close-ish to the base, have Merrin teleport everybody right to the holocron, grab it, and then teleport out again. I mean, Merrin might be able to do the entire mission on her own. It's not like Trilla was expecting someone to teleport in. Even if Trilla grabbed her with the Force, Merrin can just teleport back to the ship, because we know she doesn't need any words or hand gestures to teleport, she can just do it. Oh, it's things like this that really kill my investment. I don't care about anything these people are doing because they are so stupid they don't even realize they have an instant win button. When their stupidity gets them into dangerous situations, the plot just bails them out because all of a sudden Merrin can teleport into the deep ocean. And it's not that they had to die here. Like I said, Cal could just take Sayre's breather, but again, he's too stupid, which seems to be the motto of this game. Just have the characters stupid their way into danger so the plot can stupid them out. Irritatingly, after beating the story, even this long after the game has released, it is impossible to replay this story mission, or indeed any story mission, without restarting the entire game, and playing through every story mission before the one you actually wanted to go through again. This game doesn't have a mission select, which is baffling to me because occasionally it throws in fun, action-packed set pieces. Like on Kashyyyk, where you have to climb up a walker, hijack it, and turn it on the Empire before blowing them away. There isn't really much gameplay to speak of, but it's fun to play through, and if you want to do it again, you have to spend hours playing through the first few levels and rewatching the unskippable cutscenes just to get to this few minutes of game. The weirdest part of all this is you can't even speedrun through the levels with New Game Plus, because instead of beginning with all your abilities all leveled up, you start back at square one, the only difference being that you have all your cosmetics from your previous run and 2 new cosmetic items, those being the Inquisitor outfit and the red saber crystal. None of this would be a problem if you could actually manually save your game, but you can't. There is one save slot and it's just for autosaves. Annoyingly, this also means that if your save corrupts and you can't get any of the fixes to work, that's it. Say goodbye to all your progress, time to play the whole thing again. Get ready to sit through those glorious cutscenes. You can, at the very least, have multiple playthroughs running at the same time, but it's not like you can copy your save over to another playthrough slot for safekeeping. So that's it. That's all I have to say about this game. It's far from an exhaustive critique, but I'm not particularly passionate about this game. I think it's a huge missed opportunity, and that's what drew me into talking about it in the first place. I wanted to examine how this game could have been made better and where I believe it went wrong. To anyone who actually watches through this whole thing, feel free to criticize me to hell and back. I'm sure I've made mistakes throughout this video that I haven't managed to catch, but like I said earlier, I didn't want to spend too long on this game. I just had some thoughts about it I wanted to share. If I ever feel the need to make a video about a game in the future, it will definitely be something I'm particularly passionate about, because while it was fun to pull apart everything this game did wrong, I still can't say I have all that much passion for it. I bought this game to see if it could convince me to pick up the sequel, and after beating the whole thing and exploring everywhere I could find, I can't help but say it's left me wanting.